All right. Hi, Yasmin. Thank you so much for joining me on the Blush and Bloom podcast. So, for those meeting you for the first time, how do you describe yourself and the work that you do?
Thank you so much for having me. To those meeting me for the first time, hi, my name is Yasmin Ahmed, and I work at the intersection of law, technology, and human rights. And I specifically like to focus on things like inclusion, safety, and basically equitable access to technology for all persons. Yeah. And basically, my work revolves around policy advocacy, research, mentorship, and community engagement, basically, ensuring that, everybody has access to digital services. Yeah.
All right, that's really cool. So, you're a lawyer and you're a digital rights advocate. What inspired you to take this path?
Honestly, I've always been drawn to justice and equality. As a woman, obviously, equality is very, very important to me. We haven't gotten where we are by sitting quietly on the sidelines. Yeah. So for me, justice and equality has always been very, very important. Okay. Which is, of course, one of the things that that led me towards law as a profession. And as I said, as a woman, I've witnessed a lot of challenges, not just with myself, but with others in my community, in my culture. Yeah. And these challenges have also, they also reflect when it comes to online activity and technology. Yeah. And obviously, as a woman, I've definitely experienced a lot of them firsthand. And you're looking at things like harassment and exclusion, things like that. And because I have faced some of these, I have seen others facing a lot of these issues, it made it personal for me to make sure that other people don't face the same thing. So obviously, combined with my feminist perspective, it definitely inspired me to focus on, since I'm also like a lawyer, to focus on like the intersection of law, technology, and women's rights, to make sure that everybody is included, everyone's rights are respected. Basically, there's like the need to make digital spaces safer and more empowering for women and girls all around the world. Yeah.
All right, that's really cool. So, was there a moment that made you realize that law and technology to come together to support women's well-being?
A moment. I don't know if it was one moment, yeah, but I would think it is like a series of events, really. Basically, just being a woman in online spaces, feeling unsafe, having people, send you, offensive images or offensive information, even the fact that I've been in the receiving end of hate speech. Yeah, all of these incidents and events definitely, for me, triggered me to feel, the need to create a safer online space for, not just myself, but for others as well. Because of course, in as much as we always view and is like technology is a very huge, opportunity for everybody to grow, to, develop, to, get better jobs and all that. In as much as it has provided and amplified both opportunity, but it has also amplified risk, because now, whilst I was worried about the creep like that lives next door, now I'm also worried about the creep that is on my phone. So the fact that all of these things were, out there and I was facing them, this made it important for me to advocate for, safer online spaces, to also ensure that whilst I can access the internet or I can access digital services, others can as well. Other women can do so as well. So, as a lawyer and a woman who has faced a lot of these challenges, I realized that whilst the law is important and practicing it has had its benefits, it's not necessarily enough. No, like, is it like capable of doing everything on its own? So that is why there was a need to, look at the intersection of things like law, technology, and human rights, to make sure that we can cover the gaps that maybe the law does not cover, and also work together with others to make sure that a lot of these services that we access online and in digital spaces are, more inclusive and more safer, and yeah, for everyone.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that your experience. That's a very interesting perspective. Okay, so you founded Femtech Law Initiative, and it's such a bold step. So, do you have a personal story or experience that pushed you towards starting this?
Well, honestly, to answer this, I once had a challenging workspace issue, yeah, that affected my mental health. to such a degree that I had to stop working. I took a year off to, you know, get help and, you know, get better mentally and so on and so forth. So one thing I learned in that time was the stronger you think you are, the more difficult it is to face it when you're having some issues. So it made me understand that women can be vulnerable in various situations, no matter how strong you think you are. There's instances where you are going to be vulnerable. So basically, even those of us who think we are strong, we face instances of vulnerability. So the question was, how can we, you know, support these women, especially in tech spaces, because this is the one place that all of us have access to. Okay, not all of us, but those of us who have access to it are facing a lot of, you know, pushback, a lot of harassment, and so on and so forth. So building on my experience and basically femtech became a way to transform the lessons I learned, yeah, into impact, okay, to help others, not just myself, to help others as well. And it basically gave us a chance to create a platform that supports women and youth in online spaces with their digital rights, and promote safe, inclusive spaces for them. And yeah, basically for me, Femtech is an embodiment of my turning point in finding strength, building my mental health, yeah, and empowering others the same way I have, you know, been empowered myself.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. Has there been a mentor for you that has helped shape your voice and the way you approach your work?
Honestly, to tell you the truth, tech
Mhm.
spaces are very, very male dominated. So because of this, I haven't had a single like direct mentor. Yeah.
Mhm.
However, I always draw strength and inspiration from women who are not afraid to stand out and speak out. Yeah.
Mhm.
There's women in tech spaces that have dominated the male sphere. Whilst they have not mentored me directly, I take strength in the fact that they can stand in such a male dominated field and, you know, make change, create impact. So for me, that is the fact that I can draw from not just one person, but from multiple women, strong women out there that are making change and they're doing all these great things. It definitely motivates me to use my intellect, to use my voice, to use, you know, everything that I have, the information that I have, and, you know, in both the legal and technological spaces to make sure that what is traditionally a male dominated space, you know, can become more inclusive and create more opportunities and spaces, safe spaces for women, you know, and girls to also do the same thing. Yeah.
All right, awesome. So when we usually think about women's health, the conversations are tended towards, say, work around the hospital, supporting people who work in the clinic, or say like a period tracker or all these other things. But your work also shows that women's health goes beyond these things and also includes topics like safety and access and empowerment online. So how do you see digital rights fitting into the current health conversations that we're having?
Well, usually when we talk about women's health, it's easy to think only about hospitals or clinics, basically physical interaction with healthcare. But health is more holistic. It includes mental, emotional, and social well-being. And today, as like technology has done so many things, it has changed so many things, and it has redefined how we view even health. Okay, the way we access healthcare, the way we access health information, you can do all of this using, you know, digital platforms ranging from like telemedicine and mobile health applications to even things like AI driven diagnostics, yeah, and, you know, online educational tools. So basically we have seen healthcare expand into the tech space, into the digital space, into something that before we could not even fathom. Okay, so now you can actually call your doctor on your phone and have a conversation, have, you know, you can actually have AI diagnose whatever symptoms you've got. I don't know how I would trust that, but you can do that. But you have to see that at the same time, online safety creates a bit of, you know, an issue when it comes to things like tech and health in tech spaces and telemedicine, because you think things like SRHR are very sensitive. And if you have instances where, you know, data has not been protected, it has been leaked out, issues of harassment, and privacy violations. This will affect definitely the mental state of the patients who are accessing these platforms and all that, and their emotional well-being, because at the end of the day, this will lead to harassment. Because imagine if you're getting SRHR services online, and suddenly this information has been made accessible to the entire community that does not believe in SRHR. Okay, so yeah, this could be a little harmful. And as we said, at the end of the day, you're looking at the fact that things like online harassment, cyber harassment, cyberbullying also have an impact on the mental state of women and girls. It's also something that we need to take note of, because at the end of the day, violence isn't just physical, it can also be emotional, and it can be psychological, and all of these are mental health care issues. Yeah. So basically, protecting women online is very, very important, especially when it comes to healthcare, whether it is through mental health or just making sure and governing a lot of these telemedicine apps and applications, so that they are safer and protect people's data. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And it reminds me of the T app situation where there was that data leak and everybody was talking about it. Yeah. Okay. So from your
because things like that create issues, because imagine you haven't told your spouse you're having fertility issues, and then suddenly the app releases to your spouse that you cannot conceive, and then it becomes an issue that that is really absurd. So yeah, things like that are very harmful, because at the end of the day, there's reasons why patient confidentiality is important.
I agree. Okay. So from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges women in Uganda face when it comes to digital safety and access to information?
Well, for the Ugandan context, one of the bigger challenges is the digital divide. Okay. People in rural areas don't have much access to the internet as opposed to the people in like the urban areas. Yeah. And on top of this, like the fact that even infrastructure widens this gap a lot, because there's a lot of infrastructure in the urban areas, but then when you go, the deeper you go, like the infrastructure just keeps dwindling and dwindling. And this goes to more than just internet infrastructure. This is even things like electricity, and the ability to penetrate internet into the deeper recesses of the rural communities. So the digital divide makes it very, very difficult for women to access online services. Of course, on top of that, you also have to look at things like digital literacy. Can they use the internet? Do they understand how it works? Do they understand security features? If you do not understand these things, even if you happen to be given a device and you have internet, you may fail to access it. You may fail to properly utilize it. Yeah. And even then, when they go online, because they are unaware and they have low digital literacy skills, they have very low online safety, trainings. They don't understand a lot of the security features. When they go online, it is so easy for them to, get taken advantage of, to face harassment. And yeah, so at the end of the day, you're looking at digital literacy and digital divide, because these are very, very critical issues. And as Uganda is one of the biggest language diverse countries in the world, you find that language integration is extremely low. So if you cannot speak English, your ability to use the internet is hampered, because at the end of the day, even if I go to the different communities and teach them how to use the internet and teach them how to use devices and all of these things, even if I do so in their local language, when they go online, they won't find the local language, they will find English. So unless they can cram how to, I press this button, I press that button, like you have just crammed that information. But at the end of the day, you can't properly utilize the information, because you cannot understand it. Even if you went to like things like LinkedIn, if you cannot read English, you can't use it. If you even X, you understand, if you cannot understand the language in which it is, even not just using the app, even the fact that content that they receive is in languages they do not understand. So at the end of the day, these are all barriers that make it very, very difficult for them to use internet, and also, to be safer online. And obviously, things that cut across are like data privacy. We recently in Uganda, the office of the private data office private data protection office is required to register all, companies, organizations that collect data from people. Of course, when you have tech companies, you realize they're the biggest data collectors that exist. They collect a lot of our personal data. So we have had issues with the fact that they are not very good with compliance. So we recently had a case in Uganda that required Google to comply with the Office of the Data Protection. And we're waiting to see how they implement this, because the judgment came out that required that Google should comply and register with the Private Data Protection Office. So we're waiting to see how that turns out. But yeah, we'll definitely have things to do with data privacy issues and compliance. Yeah.
Okay. So I love that you mentioned this particular part about Uganda doing work around data privacy. So how do you think that will influence, because there's a rise of conversations around data protection because of AI and all these other applications. So why do you think it matters so much for women's health applications? What are your thoughts on this? So let's say, for example, there's a startup founder who's building in Uganda. What does she have to factor in terms of this?
Well, at the end of the day, we always have to remember that data protection is a very, very fundamental. It's very critical, especially when it comes to things like women's health and basically anything to do with women. Privacy, no matter what sector you're in, is extremely important. And we all have the right to privacy. And this is not like when it comes to the information we give out, we should at least have the ability to control who has access to it, who can use it. So when you look at tech apps or even apps that are meant to handle women's issues, whether they're digital health platforms or social media platforms, the fact that they collect a lot of sensitive personal data, especially when you're looking at things like health apps, the type of data that you submit into a social media app is not going to be the same data that you submit in a health app. Okay, they're going to have access to a lot of your health information that is very, very personal information. So from things like reproductive health to menstrual cycles, because we have people who use the period trackers, yeah. These are all health apps, yeah, to pregnancy tracking, basically sexual health details. So if that data isn't protected, women can face a lot of privacy violations, stigma, and definitely harassment, okay? And we understand that usually when someone faces harassment or when they face, pushback online, for women, they tend to, pull back and stop accessing a lot of these digital services. So that can be very, very terrible, because then they won't have access to this information. They won't have access to any of the benefits that come with, using online services. So basically, strong data protection makes sure that we can all, women can safely access a lot of these services, and they can do so confidently, knowing that, when I use this app, it my data will not just randomly end up in the wrong place. So keeping that in mind, I feel that whenever tech companies are designing for women, they should design with privacy, privacy at the beginning, from the beginning, from inception, with privacy as the main thought. Because at the end of the day, women are highly, highly affected by data breaches. And yeah, so you cannot always just look at it as a technical or legal issue, or basically to protect women's health and their autonomy, their privacy, and their dignity, specifically because of the type of information that we share on these apps. It is very critical to make sure that privacy is not just an afterthought. Yeah, it's definitely part of the design. They should make sure that there is privacy by design, not just as as by the way that they can add on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing your perspective on that. And that brings me to my next question, because you've already answered. I think that's basically one of the answers to it. What does femtech mean from the African context, and how might it look different from, say, Europe and the US?
Well, femtech basically regards to, because when we were picking the name, we wanted, women in tech, but we didn't want to say women in tech or females in tech. But for the African context, at the end of the day, what a lot of people don't understand, especially funders, because a lot of our funders are from, the Western world, and they do not understand that the African context will always vary from the European or the American context, because we have different issues that we're dealing with. You're looking at maybe a European state that has about 90% internet penetration. That's not the same here. You're looking at an African state with about 15% internet penetration. Yeah. So FemTech basically was designed to meet the needs of women in Africa. Yeah, we're looking at things like health, safety, financial inclusion, education, and empowerment, because these are the things that women in Africa are facing, especially in online spaces. Basically, whilst you might have different issues in Europe when it comes to digital spaces, you might find that whilst online safety is different in Europe or whatever, you find that it's easier for them to have policies or to implement them, because the European Union has the ability to hold tech companies accountable. But that's not the same here. It's not the same here because we don't have the same mechanisms in place to hold tech companies accountable. Yeah. So whilst we have data protection laws, for example, how are we implementing them against big tech? It's very, very difficult and very tedious to do so, because we do not have the same enforcement capacity as, maybe like the EU or maybe the United States. So at the end of the day, the issues that we face are definitely different. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much for sharing your perspective on that. So like Uganda is seeing rapid growth in platforms like mobile money, e-health, and online learning, which is so cool. So what opportunities and risks do you see for women in this era of digital transformation?
Okay, this is to link it with your previous question, to be exact. First of all, it's the fact that apps like these, the mobile money, the e-health, are usually, for example, in Africa, they're designed to work quite differently from the way they would in Europe or America, because you have to take into consideration, there's people who don't have internet, so let's make sure they can get SMSs. Yeah, you can do transactions via OTTP. Yeah, you can just do an SMS. You can do mobile money without internet and all that. So definitely the fact that a lot of these applications have diversified, they have definitely seen a big growth, especially mobile money, because it has made transactioning a lot easier, especially in Uganda. And yeah, they definitely have offered a lot of opportunities, especially because a lot of women in Uganda are involved in informal business. And these apps and these applications, they make it easier for them to transact, to communicate, to keep track of business and stuff like that. And it has enabled people to work remotely, do cross-border trade, and all these opportunities have been opened up. And these are some of the benefits of things like mobile money and e-health and online learning, because now I don't have to travel all the way to the UK to do my master's. I can still do it from here. Okay. But at the same time, where there is opportunity, there's always risk, of course. And when it comes to Ugandan context, as I mentioned earlier, things like the limited digital literacy and the weak data protection, as well as things like online safety issues like harassment and poor implementation of laws. All of these issues that make online access or digital access, digital platforms, very difficult for women to use, and they make the risks even worse, because if you have low digital literacy skills, you're not going to be able to benefit from any of these things. You have to be able to have a specific level of skill to use mobile money or to use online learning. And if you don't have that, it's going to be very difficult for you to access the platforms, to access the information, to understand the information that you get from there. So at the end of the day, you also have things like fraud when it comes to mobile money. Because of the weak data protection, you have a lot of fraud cases. Because to give you an example, someone's going to call you with the information they got from your service provider, and they will call you and actually mention your name. They're like, "Oh, Yasmin, how are you? I am calling you from this, and that. And yeah, you have this information that you have done ABCD or you haven't. So anyway, if you want your, say, line not to be disconnected, maybe you need to pay us, 50,000. And if you're not conversant with the fraud cases or the fact that this is, a fraudulent person, a lot of people actually fall for these scams and they end up, spending this money. So the fact that this person had access to private information that only the service provider had shows you exactly how weak enforcement is on data protection. So yeah, these are all issues and risks that we face, especially when it comes to things like mobile money and online learning. So basically, to truly ensure digital transformation and that it is done well and it benefits women in society, there's a need for it to be safer and more inclusive. And to do this, we basically need to implement more of the laws that we have, for example, the data protection laws, to ensure that at least the data is protected. So people who are fraudulent cannot, access this data and use it against, the different women who are trying to benefit and to use these services.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing your perspective on that. Globally,
Okay.
there's a growing concern about AI and online harms. How do you see these issues playing out in Uganda, especially for young women and girls?
Well, as we know, AI and online technologies have improved a lot of things. They have brought about incredible opportunities, but also they have created serious risks for, young women and girls in Uganda. For example, algorithms can amplify harmful content, reinforce things like biases, and basically target vulnerable users. You have to remember that algorithms are designed to push the most exciting, the most, followed content. And sometimes this content is harmful. Okay. So the other thing is things like generative AI, things like generative AI like deepfakes and manipulated content. Okay. This has mostly contributed things like online sexual violence, as well as, it has also been used in the political sphere to create like fake voice notes or fake audio messages that depict political personalities in a negative light. And because the fact that a lot of people do not understand how this works, it's very difficult to keep track of what is real and what is not. Okay, because obviously voice modulators can now be used in scams and frauds. We've seen instances not in other countries like the UK and the US, where like voice modulators and AI voice apps were used to, fake the CEO's voice, for example, to extort money or to have, the organization send money somewhere else, which created issues. So at the end of the day, you understand that the fact that there's limited digital literacy, especially in Uganda, it makes it harder for women to, recognize or defend against such threats. And you notice that in the African, cultural context where women's dignity is highly valued and, damage can be immediate and it can be long lasting. So if something is false, once it's posted online, many people tend to believe it's true because they don't understand how AI works, or that there is technically an app that can fake some of this stuff. Yeah, so it will definitely harm the woman's reputation, their career, their life. Okay, because to give you a quote, yeah, there's Mark Twain said that a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. The thing about that is, especially when it comes to AI, is that people don't actually even understand that AI can create very, very real, believable images. They're false, but because they look so, real, and they do not understand that this could be misinformation, or this could be, meant to harm. So at the end of the day, having to prove that such an image or video is AI generated, or even audio, can be extremely, extremely difficult for most women. And especially since the kind of skill that is required to even identify and prove or show the world that, okay, what, this image or this video is AI generated, could be a little bit outside the context of what an average Ugandan woman can do. Yeah. And addressing these challenges basically requires gender sensitive policies and awareness programs, because awareness programs are very, very important, because as I said earlier, most people don't even understand that extent that AI can, go or can be used to create or to, perpetrate harm. And yeah, there's also a need for platform accountability. At the end of the day, these platforms are responsible for a lot of the content, and they are also responsible for content moderation and things like that. And the fact that they're not doing their job is worrying. So yeah, we do need platform accountability to ensure that AI and digital technologies can empower women and girls rather than putting them at risk. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on that. I think it's very important. I think it's very important the points you're raising, especially around how it's relevant for us to protect women and girls. And I think it's really cool. I don't know about in Uganda, but I think recently, like even in Nigeria, they introduced this digital literacy class, which I think is going to be very important. Hopefully they do it well, because I think it's very important, especially now for children to be very aware of where they are in the internet and how they use it and how they approach things, because eventually those children or those girls will eventually be women one day, and we want to give them like the safest environment possible in this day and age where there's so many ways to fabricate things and use, like you said, use AI to just use a modulator and fake somebody else's voice. So fingers crossed that we are able to protect ourselves.
That
Okay.
is true. In Uganda, you have the digital transformation roadmap that
Yeah.
basically states that schools and education facilities should have, and a lot of the students should be taught on how to use technology and technological services, digital services, and all that. But at the end of the day, it also comes down to capacity to implement. At the end of the day, can they actually keep up with this? And also, if they're implementing, what are they teaching them? Because at the end of the day, is it just digital skills, or will it also involve things like online safety training and so on? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Fingers crossed that implementation is going to be good and it include, yeah, like as you just rightly said. Okay, so looking ahead, how can lawyers, policymakers, and technologists work together to create healthier digital ecosystems for women?
Creating healthier digital ecosystems requires genuine multi-stakeholder collaboration, because if you have only one stakeholder, trying to pull the rope, it's going to be very difficult for them implementation-wise, because everybody has a role to play and they must put in the work. Okay, so lawyers definitely are the ones who usually, help to craft or to interpret a lot of these laws, whether the gender sensitive laws. And policymakers tend to implement, to create, and create enforcement mechanisms for these laws. And the different stakeholders, the civil society, raise awareness, they provide trainings and support women in navigating, online spaces safely. So everybody obviously has a specific role they have to play when it comes to, creating healthier digital ecosystems for women. And this type of collaboration ensures that, the efforts are coordinated, they are practical, and they're definitely impactful. Otherwise, you'd have repetition of work, or you would have, people who are left behind, because at the end of the day, government is supposed to be going to look at majority and possibly leave out minorities. So when everyone works together, it can, reduce the burden to, make a healthier ecosystem, but also it can reduce things like harassment and, create safer online spaces, because everybody is working together to ensure that, women have access and they are safer and they're empowered to participate in the digital world. Basically, it's about shared responsibility and, providing practical solutions and making sure that we create spaces where women's voices and rights and dignity are truly protected. Yeah.
All right, awesome. Okay, so we are headed towards the end of the podcast episode. So I have a few more questions left. If you could leave one message for a woman who's listening to the podcast, what would that message be?
One message, let's see. To any women who are listening, my message is your voice, your safety, and your rights matter, online and offline. Okay? Don't let age, don't let gender, don't let the lack of experience stop you from, claiming spaces, to pursuing opportunities, or even speaking out against things that, against wrongs in the society. The digital space is full of potential. It is full of there's opportunities to learn, to connect, and basically to create impact. But remember that it's also important to protect yourself, build your skills, and also work to advocate for safe and more inclusive spaces. Basically, fight for yourself and fight for others, because progress happens when women support one another and support their rights. And basically, we can use technology to do all of those things. Yeah. The power to change your life, to change others' lives, definitely lies in yourself, and you can inspire yourself to do this. You can inspire others to do this, and if we all work hard, it will make it easier to attain.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, So this is basically, I think it's almost like my favorite question altogether in the whole podcast. So what would you tell 15-year-old you?
That's a very interesting question, by the way, because
It's my
15-year
one.
old me and the current me are like different types of people entirely. But what would I tell 15-year-old me? For one, there's so many things I'd like to say because obviously the
Yeah.
confident, maybe outspoken and resilient person that I am today is extremely different, as I said, from, the 15-year-old Yasmin who, was struggling so much to fit in, to blend in with everybody, and, to basically conform to the system and not stand out. And to her, I would say, trust yourself, embrace your uniqueness and curiosity, and definitely don't be afraid to stand out. And yeah, it's okay to make mistakes, to question the different things around you, and to assert yourself and your voice. Because every challenge that I have faced has built me, has made me stronger, has made me more resilient. And yeah, there is definitely I think I would need to teach her that, she has the potential to grow into someone who can protect not just herself, but others as well, and not to underestimate herself and her voice. And yeah, it's whilst fitting in tends to be important when you're 15, it's not always the right thing to do. But yeah, sometimes it's better to stand out and, you know, just love the uniqueness of yourself. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. Hopefully that helps another 15-year-old who probably be listening to this podcast, maybe. Okay. So what's next for you and Femtech Law Initiative?
Well, for both me and Femtech, we intend to focus on, deepening impact, expanding our reach, and yeah, definitely strengthening or advocating for, better protections for women and children in digital spaces, advocating for safer online spaces, educating people how to be safer and so on and so forth. We want to continue to build awareness and for people to also learn what their digital rights are, because we have learned that a lot of people don't actually understand what digital rights are, what they mean, what they represent. Yeah. And yeah, basically provide practical support for women and children, in online environments. We're also exploring, strategic partnerships, also looking towards policy advocacy and capacity building programs so that we can empower more women to, access technology safely and, participate in digital economies and defending themselves online, their rights online. And yeah, basically, ultimately, anyway, our goal is to create a more inclusive and safe digital ecosystem in Uganda and across Africa. So yeah, such that technology is, used by women to build women, and it can also be, more inclusive and it can empower women as opposed to, being a tool for harm. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And finally, for listeners who want to connect with you and learn more about your work, where can they find you?
The best place to connect with me and learn about Femtech is online. You can find both me and Femtech, because Femtech has its own page on LinkedIn. You can search for Femtech Law Initiative on LinkedIn and Yasmin Ahmed on LinkedIn as well. But we do also have Twitter, X pages. Femtech has the Twitter handle is at Femtech X Law, and for Yasmin, it is that girl. So you can search for that girl. And yeah, we do also have different. We have an account on Blue Sky. We have one on Instagram. So you can just search Femtech Law Initiative on any of these spaces, and you'll definitely be able to reach us and connect us. Unfortunately, we do not have a website right now, but it will be going live very, very soon. Within a couple of weeks, we should have the Femtech website online and available. So yeah, hopefully you'll be able to also contact us through there and be able to, catch up and on updates of our projects, events that we have taken part in, and all the digital rights work that we're doing and our partners. Yeah, we do love connecting with women and youth and allies passionate about online safety and digital rights and technology and basically empowerment of women. So feel free, don't hesitate to reach out and, join us in this conversation, in this fight. Feel free to contact us if you'd like to collaborate in any of these areas and all that. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. I'll include the links to everything in the show notes and in the description for the viewers. Thank you so much, Yasmin. It's been wonderful having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much as well. It was a pleasure to have this conversation with you and to be invited in this space. It truly means a lot for me to be able to have a platform or a space to be able to have this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.